was back in September last year, September 23, when we first saw this 2024 WR450F from Yamaha, and pretty exciting. Look, obviously we knew at that point, Yamaha's got into a habit of, the big upgrades they make to the motocross model. The YZ450F a year hence, you find that on the Enduro model, and I think it was exciting because we saw the scale and the breadth of evolution in that 2023 Yamaha YZ450F. So, the expectations were pretty high, and sure enough, when we saw, what came out with this WR on paper, it was incredible. And I actually go the trouble all the time, just like, not just believing a brochure. Okay, get last year's shot up, have a look at them side by side, literally, head to head them in imagery, and look at the differences. And, for me, that just reinforced, it's not just, I think it's one of the most significant upgrades ever. Certainly more than, 06, which came out with an alloy frame, certainly more than 2012, which was a bit of a cobbled together thing with a YZ50 frame, certainly more than the sort of, the 19 and 21 models, which was the last big upgrades for this thing. So I actually wrote a little bit of a note to myself. It was almost overwhelming, right? It's like, well, Christ, when I come and test this thing, and we've had this opportunity out here at Stroud to do that now, sort of, what is it, sort of 6 months after, we first saw shots and information about this bike, I wrote myself a little question, and I wanted to come into this with this in mind. And I said, given that sort of breadth of those changes, I said to myself, well, what is it that's, the most significant change on this bike, and in terms of look, feel, effect on performance? Is it the slimmer, low and more compact ergos? One. Is it the sweeping changes to bodywork, which there are some? That's the two. Is it the waste loss or mass centralisation? And there are examples of it all over this bike. Is it the updates to the power plant or the clutch and transmission? There's big changes there too. Or is it just the added adjustability by virtue of the extra functionality of the tuner, tuning app, and now that you've got sort of clicker, tool-free clicker adjusters in the fork. So, and the answer is actually it's a combination of all those elements. This bike is, I think what makes it sort of something super special is the harmony of all those things working together, developed in unison, and that's a really big standout. Interesting, when we talked to the Yamaha guys, we had a launch in Newcastle last night, and they gave us a little bit of an insight into the build philosophy of the bike, and talking to some of the Yami personnel. And what was really interesting is that ever since 2016, these bikes have had had YZF DNA coursing through their veins. The idea being that, okay, you've got an Enduro bike here on the trail, but it's a motocross bike, with concessions made to Enduro, adapted for Enduro applications. And that sort of stood them in good stead. I mean, this is the biggest selling bike in the Australian market, two-stroke or four Enduro bike, that is. Has been for a long time. Since 1998, it's sold the best part 40,000 units. So incredibly important model for Yamaha, incredibly important for Yamaha Australia, because it's such a big seller here. But incredibly big seller for important model for Yamaha. But this time around, they made a really interesting and I think really significant difference in the fact that they just, hey, this is not just an adapted motocross bike. Clearly it is. Clearly it's integrated and taken on pretty much all those things that we saw a year ago on the motocross bike. But it's done it in a way that much more enduroized, and by that, I think actually there was a little, what I wrote it down, there was a little, slimmer, lighter and faster. That's the kind of like little jingo, but easier to ride fast, easier to ride slow. And I think that's kind of critical, right? Because when you release a bike that's, got better motocross chops, what's the average sit-down trail ride guy going to say? Well, that means I can't ride it. So yes, it's, yes, it's firm. Yes, it's, hard nose. Yes, it's much closer to those hard nose Enduro weapons, that we're used to out of Europe for a long time. But it's been really cleverly designed in a way that it's got real versatility. So, right, again, made myself a new nose. So much stuff to talk about. I'm going to try and keep it top line, because we're going to have a chat to a couple of the Yami guys as well. But the stuff that really jumped out at me, just the look and the feel of the bike. I've always sort of said for 10 years now, you get on the Yamaha and this big bloody, big, wide, fat tank here, like it's a bit of an optical illusion, but it feels to me like a Clydesdale, a big shouldered horse, right? And it feels big and clunky. It's always had that sort of dip in the seat. The shrouds have flared out a long way, so just the look of the thing. And even when you compare it, in terms of mass centralisation, that muffler now is probably about, I don't know, 70 or 80 mil sort of closer in. So the whole bike, and then obviously all this bodywork, much more seamless, much more streamlined. So that's a big thing. And when I say it's narrower, get this, 50 millimeters. So it's not just an optical illusion. So it's clearly narrower and much more, like I say, about those Enduro bikes coming out of Europe. So doesn't make a huge difference in when you're standing up, but when you're sitting down, being able to get forward and move around in the saddle. Also a much flatter seat, and what I really like about it is it's a much more rounded profile, which creates helps give the bike some more agility. Other thing is, I think they've managed this. It's really interesting when you look at the comparison of the engines, but effectively by making the engine much more compressed, they've allowed it to have more ground clearance, keep the pegs low, and have a little bit more sort of basically foot peg to seat. So I think there's been a bit of criticism with Yamaha over the years that it's been a little bit cramped, so they've got away from that. And in doing so, they've actually just created a much nicer, easier seating position as well. The other thing that jumped out at me, and I wrote a note here, it's stability. Gets a slice of agility. So Yamahas have always been stable, right? There's a conservative mentality through the design philosophy of the brand that they don't want a flighty bike. They want a beautiful, stable thing that can set and forget through a rock garden. It's still got that, but what it now is accompanied by is that agility. So, and I think, riding the motocross bike, it was obviously much thinner here too, but having that in a situation where you're in a trail situation where you're hitting stuff and not, you're seeing stuff and reacting to it for the first time, not premeditating turns like you do more in motocross, that's a huge benefit. So that agility, and it's a combination of everything: a lower headset, the shape of the tank, the narrower, that's why I say it's all the harmony that creates that. The other thing for me is the power. It's a completely different engine. It's not just new conrod, new piston, new bits and pieces. It's completely different. Transmission's different. Got a diaphragm spring clutch. So. Difficult for us today because we really had very, very greasy conditions, so didn't really get the opportunity to, excuse me, I've been crook lately, didn't really have the opportunity to sort of open it up and feel the fire breathing end of the equation with this engine. But I think, again, coming back to how they've modified the motocross engine, they've basically put it, there's a huge range of variety both up and down. So for instance, in the old previous models, once you took the WR muffler off and put a motocross muffler on, it suddenly felt like a motocross bike again. Whereas if you were to do that on this, well, first of all, the muffler is not something you want to take off, but there's much more in terms of the way it's adapted to create those enduro manners and to make it versatile and really good in all sorts of terrain. So today, really slick around here, grass track, out in the bush, really slick as well. So obviously, we're going to get an opportunity to test one of these another time, or several more times. Hopefully, take one home as a long termer, and we'll talk more about that power. But the experience today was actually dumbing down the power. So we created a mud map. I think we took 80% of the ignition advance out to create a mud map, and then sort of fattened up a little bit of fuel just off the bottom. And that made it really doughy, and it was about the only way you could get through this really sticky stuff. So that just, for me, reinforced the adjustability. Some really slick little sort of switch blocks now to allow you to do that. The functionality of that app is something that takes a little while to get used to. The guys took us through it today. So, but that to me was really interesting. Transmission, they said it's a wider transmission. This year it's not. It's actually just got wider gears, which makes it a little bit stronger. Still only a 5-speed, which is something that some people have reservations about, and I understand that. The 250F, WR450F is a 6-speed. So I opened up on the road and got to 130 today, but I was in sort of suburbia, so I'm not sure what it'll top out at. But I'd love to see one day a 6-gear, but obviously they can't fit a 6-gear in this at the moment without changing the engine cases. And the other thing is, it's gone to a diaphragm spring clutch, and I don't think much was made of that, but a really clever, simple design where the primary gear is obviously, mated into the back of the clutch basket. Much simpler, creates I'm not sure. Usually a diaphragm spring clutch is a slightly lighter pull. I reckon it might be slightly heavier. Having said that, these bikes are brand new. It's been so wet here for the last couple of days that the Yami guys haven't had a chance to really run the bikes in properly. But yeah, look, transmission was slicker, easy to find neutral, which has been a bit of an issue on these bikes in the past. Definitely easier start in gear when hot. I had a few flameouts, but again, coming back to the fact that the bikes were literally, had not even had an hour on them, you know, both the suspension and the engine. So like, I think the jury's out on that one a little bit. I mucked around with the idle screw to get that better today, but flameouts was an issue that, you know, that I had in the bush. And the other thing I mentioned before, like the muffler, you know, like anyone who got a WR before, the muffler was a piece of genius because it created the power delivery that, you know, created that really nice usable power. But, you know, people looked at it, it was a pea shooter, and they're like, oh, let's piss that thing off, it's heavy, let's get going. So that's, in all, as I understand it, for all intents and purposes, you know, a YZ muffler. As I said before, the adjustability I think is something really cool on this bike. You know, we've now got the 4 clickers. It was a real eye-opener for me going through that mapping, and I'd like to do a whole lot more of that to understand, you know, really the breadth of adjustment that, you know, that comes with this thing. And then there's a bunch of other little bits and pieces, you know, like, you know, when you look at the bash plate, it gives much better protection to, you know, engine cases and to some of the plumbing down there. You know, there's a rear grab handle now here, so that the guard's thicker. So there's been, you know, a huge amount of thought going into this thing. So, yeah, all in all, pretty special, fairly limited in our capacity to test the thing today and get a really good insight into, you know, what it can do when it's in full noise, because we were slithering around a lot of the time. But certainly from a design philosophy perspective, I think, you know, Yami's really kicked it out of the park. This is by far and away the most significant evolution on its predecessor that, you know, you've ever seen in, what is it, 25 years of you know, WR450F, well, started as a 400, 426, 450, but in that lineage, it's by far and away the most significant evolution. So really looking forward to, you know, grabbing one of these, and I think we're going to get one in a month or two as a long-term test bike, living with it, spending a lot more time on, I think, what is probably underappreciated, which is the, you know, the Power Tuner app to be able to adapt power. But also there's a lot of other functional benefits of that app as well. So, you know, all in all, pretty special bike. I think, you know, the Yami guys, you know, should be really proud of what they've done with this, and in particular the fact that, you know, guys like Peter Payne, guys like AJ Roberts and Josh Green and Josh Coppins, and, you know, a lot of these Anzac guys who've been so instrumental in developing this thing to suit our conditions and be able to bring out a registerable bike that's this high performance, this lightweight, this versatile, and obviously, you know, underpinned by all the things like, you know, Yamaha's notorious reliability, I think is, you know, is a real credit to those guys.